Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about how to prepare and teach a read aloud lesson using adapted grade level literature. I'm Dr. Melissa Hudson and I'm going to be your narrator for today. We've got several handouts provided. The first is an overview of the steps for planning and teaching a read aloud lesson. You'll find this listed as using component 2, building with read alouds. This is because this is part of the Building with Stories curriculum. Every step that you'll need to do is detailed in this information. So you'll want to read it before you start planning your lesson. Also included is a template that's completed of an example that you can use when you're creating your own lesson. This one is about the mouse and the motorcycle. It's at the tail end of the overview of the steps. You'll also have a blank template to work with. You can use this blank document to plan your own story-based lesson, and using the story that you select. There's also a quick lesson reference guide or a quick reference guide for the read aloud lesson, as pictured here. You'll also have several books to choose from. These are in the Teacher Resource Center at East Carolina University, or if you don't have access to the university's library, you can always email me. I have final copies of all of these stories. You can see that there are several different grade levels. You can choose an elementary book, you can choose a middle school book, you can choose a high school book. These are all adapted for students that have for listening comprehension. So they're at around about a 500 to 600 level Lexile. You'll also have available to you a task analysis of the steps for conducting the read aloud lesson. Now this should become clear to you that this is a good piece of information to have to do your own self-evaluation about how well you taught the lesson, which is important for reflection, and it's also a piece of information that can be used, or a checklist, if you will, that can be used for your procedural fidelity. So when you are actually teaching these lessons, you're going to have a peer or someone observing you who is completing this task analysis of the lesson. And every time they see one of these steps being implemented in your lesson, they'll put a little check mark there at the end, and then you'll tally up how many of the steps you actually completed versus how many you plan to complete. Okay, so we have already talked about procedural fidelity, but if you have any questions about it, please let me know. All right, so let's get along with talking about the read aloud lesson itself. Of course, we only teach you to do things that are evidence-based or research-based. In this case, a read aloud lesson is actually an evidence-based practice. It has so much good quality literature saying that it's a good way to teach early literacy skills to students with moderate and severe disabilities that we've been able to call it an evidence-based practice. It's appropriate for students at all grade levels, from elementary to high school. All students who are not independent readers need a way to access grade level text. A read aloud is a great way to do it, and not just for literature either. It can be for science, it can be for social studies, it could be for health, it could be for even math. We're going to do math lessons with that feature read alouds. It's also as I just said, a great way to access the general curriculum. All right, and kids really like them. Students really like read aloud lessons because you can add so many things that make them engaging. Even kids who don't have a verbal way to communicate can actively participate in these lessons using AAC devices or other devices that you add in and make available to them. All right, let's talk about the purpose of a read aloud lesson. For our purpose in the first tutoring opportunity, it's going to be for literature, right? But the overall purpose is for students to learn to participate in read aloud lessons along with their same age peers in general education class. Like I said, all kids like to participate and be involved in a read aloud lesson. And so by teaching our students with moderate and severe disabilities how to be engaged in a read aloud lesson, we're enabling them to do things that their same age peers would do. It also is a great way, the read aloud lesson is a great way to teach vocabulary and definitions and concepts. And you'll be adding these all in and teaching these in your own lessons. It's a great way to increase students' general knowledge, just simply based on what the story's about and based on the broadness of your capability. You can teach a story-based lesson literally just about anything. You can take opportunities within your lesson to enhance print awareness and conventions of print. We covered these concepts, what print awareness is and what conventions of print are, in 2200. So if you need a review of those concepts, you have your Browder book, or you can refer back to our 2200 course, or if you have never had 2200, perhaps just email me. We'll take care of it. Story-based lessons, read alouds are great ways to experience the pleasure of literature, right? Most of our kids that we teach in the adapted curriculum are not independent readers, and therefore they depend on someone else to read the stories aloud to them. Also, because of the questions that we ask, it's a great way to improve their listening comprehension skills, which again for non-readers is the main way that they comprehend the text that they read. We'll do a quick review of Bloom's taxonomy in this PowerPoint, but if you need more information, like I said, this is review for students, should be review for you. If you need more information, they'll refer back to your textbook. All right, let's get into the lesson itself. The first thing we want to do is grab their attention. This should be a really fun activity that you plan that goes along with your lesson. It can be a video. Students always ask me that. Can I show a quick video? Yes, you can. But go beyond that. I just encourage you. Sometimes a video is just the thing. You want to show how an airplane lifts off and you're going to be talking about a story. Your story today is about flight, maybe the first flight. But try to think beyond a video. Think about something that relates to the theme of the story. What you really want to do with this attention grabber or your attention getting activity is to activate the student's background knowledge about what you're going to talk about in the lesson, what you're going to read about in the story. So for example, if your story is about a birthday party, ask them about their birthday. Their last birthday, have they ever had a birthday party? What was their favorite birthday party? Talk about your own birthday party. Show a picture of a birthday party. Bring things you find at a birthday party. All of these things can be worked into the attention grabbing activity using the students' senses. Maybe even bring a birthday cupcake, right? That way you've got some auditory, some visual, some tactile, some kinesthetic activities going on that are really going to activate this concept of birthday party for the student. That's what you want to do in your lesson. Think about how you can grab that student's attention and then activate their background knowledge about what they already know about that topic. All right. Again, I mentioned earlier, you can emphasize print awareness and you can promote conventions of print, especially in read aloud lessons that involve literature. Usually you have a book, right? You can point to the title of the book, the name of the author. You can show students or have them show you how to turn the page and keep the story going. All of those things are just promoting those print awareness skills and those conventions of print and engaging them in the lesson. Now, once you've done that several times, especially with older kids, you probably don't want to keep pointing out the author and the title and turning pages in the book, right? Because it's something they, especially if they have those skills in their repertoire. So I will leave that up to you, but just know that this is an opportunity to teach those skills if you need them. All right. Oh, in all of these lessons, there will be vocabulary words that you will want to identify from your lesson that you want to teach. And we're going to learn that you teach those vocabulary words usually at the opening of the lesson, after the introduction, or even before the introduction of the lesson, depending. You want to select about 2 or 3 words that you feel fairly confident the student does not know, okay? And no more than 2 or 3, right? We used to say 5 or 10, but that's way too many for kids. That's what we've learned in the literature. That's what it's told us. So 2 or 3 really important words that the kid you feel like won't know, and then define them, right? Definitions are often hard for new teachers to write. You either want to be too wordy with it, or it's not going to make sense to the kid, right? What I recommend you do when you're defining your vocabulary words is to use an online children's dictionary. Go to Webster's Children's Dictionary online and see how they define the word. And that'll get you started, and then you may need to pare it down even more, right? What you want to avoid is a definition that is super, super long, okay? So make it short and simple and something the student can understand. The other thing that you want to plan in these lessons are your comprehension questions. In a minute, we're going to talk about Bloom's. We're going to go over those levels. You know, you want to hit more than that remember level, more than those, basic literal recall questions. You want to try to bump up the complexity of the comprehension questions you asked. You can also ask summative questions and predictive questions and inferential questions. Don't shy away from those. We are learning, and you will learn and have learned ways to teach higher level thinking skills with your lesson. All right, steps for planning. First, we're going to plan the attention getter. Next, we're going to read the materials. We're going to prepare a prediction question. What do you think the story's about? Now, you want to ask this when you've shown them something about the story. So you haven't necessarily read the story yet, but perhaps you're looking at the cover of the story or the front page of the story, a picture about the story. Anything to give them something to make a prediction about. What do you think the story is going to be about? Get them to make a prediction. Predictions, the great thing about predictions is they're not ever right or wrong. You don't have to correct students at this point. You are going to revisit it, but right now you just want to get them thinking, first of all, wow, I can make a prediction. I do have something to base a prediction on, and the teacher really appreciates what I say, and she's going to accept it. You're going to choose your vocabulary words, 2 or 3, and prepare a definition for those. You might need to prepare some cards to teach those with, some 3x5 index cards, depending on the symbolic understanding of your students. And then, now, the steps for planning say to highlight the new vocabulary words in the text. That is a great thing to do, but you're going to be borrowing these adapted texts from the Teaching Resource Center. So please don't mar the Teaching Resource Center materials. If it were your own text, and if you get it from me, you most certainly can highlight them, but please don't put any highlights in the materials from the Teaching Resource Center. All right, we've already talked about the definitions. Then you're going to determine the number of pages you want to read for this particular lesson, right? So this is thinking in terms of having a larger body of literature, perhaps the entire book that you're going to be reading, right? You wouldn't want to read just a page or two or even just a chapter or two of a book. You want to read the whole thing. So in that context of reading a book, you want to think about, well, how many pages do I want to read for this lesson? So for our lesson that you'll be doing for tutoring, that will already be determined. It'll be the first chapter of the book that you select, right? So you don't have to worry about that. But when you use this technique to plan your own lessons, you want to think about how much do I want to read in this lesson? And you also want to revisit lessons, right? You want to teach the lesson at least 2 or 3 times before you move on to the next chapter. Right? You can change your comprehension questions. You can even change your vocabulary, although I wouldn't. I would keep with the same vocabulary, but I would change my comprehension questions just to keep the lesson fresh. But kids with moderate and severe disabilities need repetition in order to gain in comprehension of the text that they are having read to them or reading themselves. You want to choose 1 or more lines of the text for text pointing. That's very important. Just pick something you think would be interesting for them and make a note about where it is in the text. Sticky will work. And then create a summary line or a repeated story line that repeats the main idea of the chapter. Now, many of the stories that you get from the Teaching Resource Center will already have these, so you don't have to worry about that. But if they don't, you'll want to pick one. All right. Moving right along, once you pick your repeated story line, you want to add that summary line at the bottom of several of the adapted pages. Again, good thing to do if you're working with your own materials, but not the Teaching Resource Center. If you're going to add them to the Teaching Resource Center materials, just make sure you do it in a way that you can remove before you take it back to them. Step 11, then you want to prepare your comprehension questions. You again want to vary those questions based on Bloom's taxonomy and ask, not just all literal recall, but throw an inferential question in there as well. And then prepare your materials for how the student's going to respond to your questions. Once you get your questions, then think about how will the student respond. Even if students understand symbols, which means they understand words, they benefit from having a word, they benefit from having a student response option board to select from. So think about how you're going to prepare how students are going to respond to your questions. Maybe these students are all verbal, but then maybe they're not. Maybe they do need to respond receptively to you. So it's best to be planned. We never really know the students that we get in our tutoring sessions, especially the first time out, which will be this lesson. So I encourage you to have a receptive response prepared for your read aloud lesson. And then last, adapt the book as you need. Your book's already going to be adapted, so you don't have to worry about this. But again, these steps are for preparing any text that you'd like to teach in a read aloud lesson. And then consider how your students might respond, what their mode of responding is. Are they going to be verbal and independent, or will they need some response options? I've already said that's a good idea to plan for anyway. Just have them. If you don't need them, then you won't use them. How many distractors do you want to provide in your response array? I would encourage you to go at least 3 distractors so that you have an array of 4. But if you feel like that's too many, you can do 3 distractors with a correct response, or 2 distractors and a correct response. Also, we won't likely have students who eye gaze in tutoring, but you might in your classroom. So you'd want to consider how will they respond? What do they need? And also students who use AAC devices. What do you need to have programmed and ready for them to respond with? All right. Now let's look very quickly at the steps for implementing the read aloud lesson. You want to focus students on the theme of the book using your attention grabber. We've talked about that. It's also a great time to build their background knowledge. You want to introduce the book, title, author, I'm thinking about this particular lesson that you're about ready to do. Engage the student in pointing to or naming the title. Ask a prediction question. Give all students an opportunity to respond to the question. When you read a page that has a new vocabulary word, give all the students in your group the opportunity to say and to point to the new vocabulary word. Teach the meaning of the vocabulary words by modeling through actions or showing pictures or using synonyms. In this lesson, you will likely be teaching the meaning of your vocabulary words before the lesson begins, but you might want to point it out again during the lesson. All right, and then give students an opportunity to anticipate turning the page throughout the story without being told. You might ask if you pause and you're ready to turn the page and you don't want to say directly to them, turn the page, you might ask them, what do we need to do to keep our story going? Okay. Read and give students the opportunity to point to text where you planned it in your lesson, and then give all students the opportunity to read or complete the repeating summary line, the repeated story line, and give all students at least one turn to respond to a comprehension question. All right. Likely in the tutoring experience, you will only have one, maybe two questions, one or two students. So that's usually not a problem. Let's talk very quickly about our comprehension questions. This should be a review for most of you. When questions are pulled right from the page, when the answer is right there, it's called a literal recall question. Usually it's a low-level remembering type question. If it's not right there on the page, but requires the student to make an inference from the story, that's a textually inferential question, right? And then if the question requires the students to make a total inference, like it is not there in the story, that is an inferential question. All right. Make sure that the questions that you plan for your lesson are text dependent. This means that the student actually has to listen to the story in order to answer the question. When you ask, if you say if the picture or the title is, oh gosh, which of these is a name? This is my example in the slide. Which of these is a name? Agnes, goat, chair, or book? Well, there's only one name there. You don't have to read the text to know that. If you say, what color is the White House? You don't really need the text to answer that. It's obviously white. Okay, so make sure that the questions that you prepare for your lesson are dependent on the text. All right, Bloom's taxonomy for comprehension uh, is a way that we can plan for different complexity in our questions. All right, let's just review them real quickly. We've talked about literal recall, remembering questions. They're at the base or the easiest of Bloom's taxonomy questions to answer. But we also have understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. For those of you who were in SPED 2200, you'll remember you did an activity where you took each of the levels of Bloom's taxonomy and developed questions about that addressed either easy, medium, or more difficult levels of complexity for each of the Bloom's taxonomy levels. The next few slides are a reminder about what those could look like and how you can vary the complexity of the questions you ask depending on what your student understands about comprehension. So here's the remember level. Here's the understand level, second level. Here's the apply level. Here's the analyze level, the evaluate level, and finally the create level. the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. This will be in the PowerPoint if you want to spend more time with these examples. Now it's time for you to plan your own story-based read aloud lesson. For ECU students, you'll want to go to the Teaching Resource Center and check out one of the adapted stories from the list that we had at the beginning of this PowerPoint, and then prepare the materials as required in your teaching activity for teaching activity number 1 on our course canvas. Thank you so much for listening to this PowerPoint. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.